Prolog, and you already know what is wrong with your money. You have read the books. You have listened to the advice. You understand budgets, compound interest, delayed gratification. But your bank account has not changed. Knowledge without action is not power. It is permission to stay exactly where you are. Introduction. There is a gap between what you know and what you do. And that gap is where your financial life dies. Most people think knowledge is the problem. They believe that once they understand how money works, everything will change. But you already understand. You know you should spend less. You know you should save more. You know impulse purchases are damaging. You know debt is expensive. You know all of this. And yet nothing changes. This is not about learning more. This is about understanding why knowing better has never been enough. Why awareness does not lead to action. Why clarity does not create change. The answer is uncomfortable. You are using knowledge as a substitute for action. You are collecting information to feel like you are making progress without actually making progress. You are staying informed to avoid the risk of changing your behavior. Knowledge feels safe. It feels productive. It feels like forward motion. But it is not. It is a holding pattern. A way to delay the discomfort of real change while convincing yourself you are working on the problem. This audiobook will show you exactly how this works. How your mind uses understanding to protect you from action. How intelligence becomes an excuse. How awareness becomes a trap. And most importantly, how to break free and finally move from knowing to doing. This is not about learning more financial principles. You already know them. This is about installing a new operating system, one that connects knowledge to behavior, one that turns understanding into irreversible action. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Why knowing feels safe but changes nothing. There is a man who reads every book on fitness. He knows macronutrients. He understands progressive overload. He can explain muscle fiber recruitment and metabolic pathways. But he is out of shape. His body has not changed in years. When you ask him why, he says he is still learning. Still refining his approach. Still gathering the information he needs to start properly. But that is not true. He is not learning. He is avoiding. Because learning feels like progress without requiring the discomfort of actual change. This is what you are doing with money. You consume financial content. You read articles. You listen to podcasts. You understand concepts like emergency funds, investing, and financial independence. But your financial life has not shifted. You are still living paycheck to paycheck. Still carrying debt. Still spending impulsively. And deep down, you know that more knowledge will not fix this. But you keep consuming it anyway. Because consuming feels like doing. It feels like you are taking the problem seriously. It feels like you are working toward a solution. But you are not. You are postponing the solution. Here is why this happens. Knowledge is comfortable. It does not require risk. It does not require failure. It does not require you to face the possibility that you might try and still not succeed. Action is different. Action is exposure. When you act, you can fail. When you act, you face real consequences. When you act, you have to confront your limitations, your fears, your weaknesses. So your brain protects you. It keeps you in the learning phase. It tells you that you are not ready yet. That you need more information, that you should understand it fully before you begin. But that readiness never comes. Because readiness is not about information, it is about willingness. And as long as you can stay in the knowing phase, you never have to test your willingness. Let me give you another example. A woman named Aditi spent 2 years researching investment strategies. She understood index funds. She knew about asset allocation and rebalancing. She could explain the difference between growth and value stocks. But she never invested a single rupee. When asked why, she said she wanted to be sure. She did not want to make a mistake. She needed to fully understand the market before committing her money. But the real reason was fear. Fear of losing money. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of looking foolish. And as long as she stayed in research mode, she never had to face that fear. Her knowledge was a shield. It protected her from the discomfort of action, and it cost her years of potential growth. This is the trap. Knowledge gives you the illusion of progress. It makes you feel competent, informed, prepared. But competence without action is just another form of avoidance. Here is the psychological mechanism at work. Your brain has two systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. When you consume financial information, you engage System 2. You feel rational, in control. You are processing, analyzing, understanding. This feels good, it feels productive. But financial behavior is controlled by System 1, by habits, by impulses, by emotional reactions. And System 1 does not care what System 2 knows. It operates independently. This is why you can know that you should not buy something and still buy it. Why you can understand the importance of saving and still spend everything. Why you can be aware of your patterns and still repeat them. Knowledge lives in System 2. Behavior lives in System 1. And the gap between them is enormous. Most people never address this gap. They keep feeding System 2 more information, hoping it will eventually override System 1. But it does not work that way. System 2 does not control System 1 through knowledge. It controls it through deliberate, repeated intervention. Through action. Here is what this looks like in everyday life. You know you should not order food delivery every night. You understand it is expensive. You have calculated how much it costs per month. But when evening comes and you are tired, you order anyway. Not because you forgot what you know. Because what you know is not connected to what you do. You know you should track your expenses. You understand that awareness is the first step to control. But you do not track. Not because you lack the tools, because tracking requires daily action. And daily action requires changing your routine. And changing your routine is uncomfortable. You know you should build an emergency fund. You understand the importance of financial security. But you do not set money aside, not because you do not believe it matters. Because setting money aside means saying no to things you want now. And saying no is hard. This is the pattern. You know. But you do not do. And the gap stays open. Here is the shift you need to make. Stop collecting knowledge. Start installing behavior. Knowledge is not the problem. You have enough knowledge. What you lack is implementation. You lack the structure that turns understanding into action. You lack the system that bridges the gap between what you know and what you do. That system is not more information. It is a set of non-negotiable behaviors that operate regardless of how you feel. Behaviors that run automatically. That do not require motivation. That do not depend on your mood. Here is a practical exercise. Choose one financial behavior you know you should do. Not 10. 1. It could be tracking your spending. It could be setting aside a fixed percentage of income. It could be delaying impulse purchases by 24 hours. Now commit to doing it every single day for 30 days. Not when you feel like it, every day, no exceptions. Do not add more behaviors. Do not expand the commitment. Just do this one thing consistently for 30 days. What you will discover is that knowledge is not the bottleneck, action is. And action does not require more understanding. It requires commitment, repetition, structure. After 30 days, you will have installed a behavior. Not just understood it, installed it. And that installation is what changes your financial life. Not the knowing, the doing. This is the truth most people avoid. You do not need to know more. You need to do more. And doing requires letting go of the safety of endless learning and stepping into the discomfort of imperfect action. That step is where everything changes, not in your understanding, in your behavior. Chapter 2. The comfort of understanding without risk. There is a specific kind of pleasure in understanding something without having to change because of it. You read about a financial principle, you nod. You think, yes, that makes sense. You feel smarter for having understood it. And then you close the book and continue living exactly as you did before. This is not learning. This is entertainment disguised as self-improvement. Most people do not realize they are doing this. They genuinely believe they are working on their financial life. They listen to podcasts about wealth building while commuting. They read articles about saving strategies during lunch breaks. They watch videos about investing before bed. But none of it leads to change. Because the goal was never to change. The goal was to feel like someone who is working on change. And understanding provides that feeling without requiring any risk. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. A man named Rohan subscribed to 3 financial newsletters. He received daily emails with tips, strategies, and market insights. He read most of them. He found them interesting. He even discussed some of the concepts with friends. But when you looked at his actual financial behavior, nothing had shifted. He still had no budget. He still carried credit card debt. He still made impulsive purchases. The newsletters had given him knowledge, but knowledge without implementation is just noise. When asked why he had not applied what he learned, he said he was still absorbing the information, still building a foundation, still preparing for when he would be ready to make real changes. But that moment of readiness never arrived, because readiness is not built through consumption, it is built through action, and he was using consumption to avoid action. This is the comfort trap. Understanding feels like progress. It engages your mind. It gives you something to think about. It makes you feel like you are taking your finances seriously. But it requires nothing from you. No risk, no discomfort, no change in routine, no confrontation with your weaknesses. You get to stay exactly where you are while feeling like you are moving forward. Here is the mechanism. Your brain rewards you for learning. When you understand something new, your brain releases dopamine. This feels good. It feels like achievement. But the brain does not distinguish between understanding and doing. It gives you the same reward for both. So you get the satisfaction of progress without actually progressing. This creates a loop. You consume information. You feel good. You think you are improving. But your behavior stays the same. So your results stay the same, which means you need to consume more information to maintain the feeling of progress. And the cycle continues. You are addicted to understanding without ever reaching implementation. Here is a real-world example. A woman named Neha spent hours every week reading about minimalism and intentional spending. She understood the philosophy. She agreed with the principles. She could explain to others why overconsumption was harmful. But her closet was full of clothes she never wore. Her apartment was cluttered with items she did not use. Her bank account showed regular purchases of things she did not need. The understanding had not touched her behavior. She knew the concepts intellectually, but intellectually knowing something is not the same as living it. When confronted with this gap, she defended herself. She said she was working on it. That change takes time, that she was still internalizing the ideas, but years passed, and nothing changed, because she was using understanding as a substitute for action, and her brain accepted that substitution because understanding felt like enough. This is what you need to see clearly. Understanding is passive, action is active, and only action creates results. You can understand nutrition and still eat poorly. You can understand fitness and still be sedentary. You can understand financial principles and still be broke. Because understanding is information, and information does not change behavior. Only repeated action changes behavior. Here is another layer. Understanding without risk allows you to maintain your identity without challenge. If you read about financial discipline but never practice it, you get to keep seeing yourself as someone who values discipline without having to prove it. You get to hold the identity without the accountability. This is comfortable, because identity is fragile. When you act, you test your identity. You find out if you are actually the person you think you are, and sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you try and fail. Sometimes you discover that your identity was aspirational, not actual. But when you stay in the understanding phase, you never have to face that. You can believe you are disciplined, intentional, and financially responsible without ever testing those beliefs. Let me tell you about a man named Samir. Samir read extensively about early retirement and financial independence. He understood the math. He knew the strategies. He could calculate savings rates and projected timelines. But he never started. He kept saying he would begin once he understood it fully. Once he had the perfect plan. Once conditions were right. But the real issue was not readiness. It was fear. Fear that he would start and fail. Fear that he would sacrifice and still not reach his goals. Fear that his identity as someone capable of financial independence was just a fantasy. As long as he stayed in the learning phase, he never had to test that fear. He could maintain the identity without the risk. But this cost him years. Years where he could have been building wealth. Years where compound interest could have been working for him. Years he will never get back. This is the hidden cost of understanding without action. It feels safe. It feels productive. But it steals time, and time is the one resource you cannot recover. Here is what you need to ask yourself. Are you learning because you genuinely need more information? Or are you learning because it feels easier than doing? Most of the time, it is the second one. You already know what to do. You know you should spend less, save more, track your expenses, eliminate debt, invest consistently. You do not need another article explaining these concepts. You need to implement the concepts you already understand. Here is the shift. Stop consuming. Start installing. Pick one thing you know you should do. Not the most complex thing, not the most impressive thing. Just one clear, simple action that you know would improve your financial life. Now do it. Not tomorrow. Not after you learn more. Today. Right now. If you know you should track your spending, open a note on your phone and write down every expense for the next 24 hours. That is it. One day. Just to prove you can do it. If you know you should save automatically, set up a transfer. Even if it is small, even if it feels insignificant, just set it up. Prove to yourself that you can move from knowing to doing. The amount does not matter. The action matters. Because action breaks the pattern of endless consumption. It proves that understanding can lead to behavior. It creates a bridge between what you know and what you do. And once that bridge exists, you can cross it again and again, until action becomes your default response to knowledge, not consumption of more knowledge. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You are not confused. You are not lacking information. You are not waiting for the right time. You are comfortable. Comfortable in the gap between knowing and doing. Comfortable in the identity of someone who understands without someone who acts. But comfort is expensive. It costs you progress. It costs you results. It costs you the financial life you say you want. The only way out is through discomfort, through the risk of action, through the vulnerability of trying and possibly failing. That risk is what separates people who understand from people who change. And only the people who change ever build the life they want. Understanding is not enough. It never was. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop learning and start doing. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Being Ahead. There is a strange satisfaction that comes from knowing something that others do not. When you understand a concept that your peers have not discovered yet, you feel ahead. You feel informed. You feel like you have an advantage. But that feeling is a trap. Because knowing before others is not the same as doing before others. And only doing creates results. Let me show you how this illusion operates. A woman named Kavya discovered the concept of financial independence in her early 20s. She read the blogs. She understood the frameworks. She could explain the 4% rule to anyone who asked. She felt ahead of her friends. While they were spending without thinking, she understood the power of saving and investing. While they were focused on lifestyle, she understood the value of freedom. But 10 years later, her financial position was nearly identical to theirs. She had not saved significantly. She had not invested consistently. She had not built the life she understood was possible. She had spent a decade feeling ahead without actually being ahead. The understanding had given her a sense of superiority, but it had not given her results. This is the illusion. Knowledge creates a feeling of progress, a feeling of being further along the path than others. But if you are not taking action, you are not on the path at all. You are standing at the trailhead reading the map while others who know less are already miles ahead. Here is the mechanism. When you learn something valuable, your brain rewards you. It gives you a hit of satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment. You feel like you have gained something, and you have. You have gained information. But your brain confuses that gain with actual progress. It treats understanding as if it were achievement, and that confusion stops you from acting. Because why would you act if you already feel like you have achieved something? Why would you take on the discomfort of change when you already have the satisfaction of knowing? This is why people who understand financial principles often do not apply them. The understanding itself provides enough reward that the brain does not push for more. It feels complete. It feels sufficient. Let me give you another example. A man named Arjun learned about index fund investing years before his colleagues. He understood market efficiency. He knew the data on active versus passive investing. He could explain why low-cost index funds outperform most actively managed funds over time. He felt smart. He felt prepared. He felt like he had unlocked something important. But he never opened an investment account. He never set up automatic contributions. He never actually invested. Meanwhile, a colleague who knew far less simply started. She did not understand the theory deeply. She just set up a retirement account, chose a target date fund, and automated monthly contributions. 10 years later, she had built significant wealth. Arjun had built nothing. He knew more. But she had done more. And doing is what creates results. This is the harsh truth. Being ahead in knowledge means nothing if you are behind in action. The person who knows less but acts consistently will always outperform the person who knows more but acts rarely. Because wealth is not built through understanding. It is built through behavior repeated over time. Here is another layer of this illusion. Knowing what to do gives you permission to judge others who do not know. And that judgment feels good. It reinforces your sense of being ahead. You see someone making a financial mistake and you think, I would never do that. I know better. But then you make different mistakes, or you make no moves at all. And the result is the same. You do not build wealth. You just feel superior while staying broke. This superiority is toxic. It keeps you focused on what you know instead of what you do. It keeps you comparing your knowledge to others' ignorance instead of comparing your results to your potential. And it creates a false sense of security. You think that because you understand the principles, you are protected from financial failure. But you are not. Understanding does not protect you. Action protects you. Let me tell you about a woman named Priya. Priya read every popular book on personal finance. She knew about debt snowball versus debt avalanche. She understood behavioral economics and how psychology affects spending. She could discuss these concepts in detail, but she carried credit card debt for years. Not because she did not know how to pay it off. She knew exactly what to do. She just did not do it. Meanwhile, her friend Anjali, who had never read a finance book, simply decided to stop using credit cards and pay off her balance aggressively. She did not understand the theory. She just understood the reality. Debt was costing her, so she eliminated it. Within 2 years, Anjali was debt-free. Priya was still carrying a balance, still reading, still knowing, still not doing. This is the pattern. Knowledge without implementation is just entertainment. It makes you feel informed, but it does not make you successful. Here is what you need to recognize. The feeling of being ahead is a substitute for actually being ahead. Your brain gives you that feeling to keep you satisfied, to keep you from taking the risky, uncomfortable step of action. But that satisfaction is false. It is not based on results. It is based on comparison. You feel ahead because you know more than some people. But you are behind where you could be, behind where you should be, behind where you would be if you had acted on what you know. Here is the shift you need to make. Stop measuring yourself by what you know. Start measuring yourself by what you do. Do not ask, "Do I understand this concept?" Ask, "Have I implemented this concept?" Do not ask, "Am I more informed than others?" Ask, "Are my results better than they were last year?" Do not ask, "What do I know that others do not?" Ask, "What am I doing that is actually changing my financial position?" These questions are uncomfortable because they force you to confront the gap between your knowledge and your behavior. They force you to see that feeling ahead is not the same as being ahead. But that confrontation is necessary, because only when you see the gap clearly can you begin to close it. Here is a practical exercise. Write down 3 financial principles you understand clearly. Principles you could explain to someone else. Principles you know are important. Now, next to each one, write whether you are currently applying it, not whether you plan to, not whether you want to, whether you are actually doing it right now. Most people find that they understand far more than they apply. They have knowledge that sits unused, principles they agree with but do not practice. That gap is where your financial life is being lost. Not in what you do not know, in what you know but do not do. The good news is that closing this gap does not require more learning. It requires commitment. It requires choosing action over understanding. It requires letting go of the comfortable feeling of being ahead and accepting the uncomfortable work of getting ahead. Here is another truth. People who act without perfect understanding often succeed faster than people who understand perfectly but do not act. Because action creates feedback. When you do something, you learn whether it works. If it does not work, you adjust. If it does work, you continue. You learn through doing. But when you only understand without doing, you learn nothing new. You just reinforce what you already know. You stay in the same loop, the same level of understanding, the same lack of results. Action breaks the loop. It moves you from theory to reality, from understanding to experience, from knowing to proving. And experience is worth more than knowledge. Because experience teaches you things that knowledge cannot. It teaches you how to persist when things are difficult, how to adjust when plans do not work, how to build habits that last. Knowledge teaches you what to do. Experience teaches you how to actually do it. Here is the final truth about the illusion of being ahead. It protects you from disappointment. If you never act, you never fail. If you never fail, you never have to face the possibility that you are not as capable as you thought. That your understanding does not translate to success. That knowing is not enough, but that protection is a prison. It keeps you safe from failure, but it also keeps you safe from success, because success requires risk. It requires trying. It requires the possibility of failure. And as long as you stay in the illusion of being ahead through knowledge alone, you never take that risk. You stay comfortable. You stay informed. You stay ahead in your own mind. But you stay broke in reality. The only way out is to let go of the feeling, to stop valuing knowledge for its own sake, to stop comparing what you know to what others know, to start comparing what you do to what you are capable of doing. That comparison is harder. It is less flattering. It forces you to see how much potential you have wasted by staying in the understanding phase. But it is also the only comparison that matters, because your financial life is not built on what you know. It is built on what you do. And until you accept that, you will keep feeling ahead while staying behind. Chapter 4. Mental consumption versus real movement. There is a difference between thinking about change and creating change. Most people spend their lives in the first category. They think about saving. They think about investing. They think about cutting expenses. They plan, they strategize, they imagine. But none of that is movement. That is mental consumption. And mental consumption creates the illusion of progress without any actual forward motion. Let me show you what this looks like. A man named Deepak spent months planning his budget. He created spreadsheets. He categorized expenses. He calculated ideal percentages for savings, spending, and investing. He researched different budgeting methods. He refined his approach. The planning felt productive. It felt like he was taking his finances seriously. It felt like he was building something. But when you looked at his actual spending, nothing had changed. He was still overspending in the same categories. Still carrying the same debt, still living paycheck to paycheck. The budget existed only in his mind and on his spreadsheet. It had never touched his behavior. He had spent months in mental consumption without a single moment of real movement. This is the trap. Mental work feels like real work. Your brain does not distinguish between planning to do something and actually doing it. Both require mental effort. Both engage your problem-solving abilities. Both feel productive. But only one creates results. And it is not the planning. Here is the mechanism. When you think about solving a problem, your brain simulates the solution. It imagines the steps. It visualizes the outcome. And that simulation feels satisfying. It feels like you have already solved the problem. This is why people can spend hours planning a workout routine but never exercise. Why they can design elaborate meal plans but never follow them. Why they can create detailed financial strategies but never implement them. The simulation provides enough satisfaction that the brain does not push for execution. It feels like the work is already done, and so the actual work never begins. Let me give you another example. A woman named Mira read extensively about investing. She learned about asset allocation. She studied historical returns. She analyzed risk profiles. She compared platforms and fees. She spent over a year in this research phase. She told herself she was being careful, thorough, responsible. But the truth was she was avoiding. She was consuming information as a substitute for action, and every hour spent researching was an hour not spent investing. Meanwhile, a colleague who spent one weekend learning the basics simply opened an account and started investing. She did not have a perfect strategy. She did not understand everything. But she was in the market. Her money was working. A year later, Mira was still researching, still planning, still preparing. Her colleague had a year of returns, not perfect returns, but real returns. Returns that Mira would never have because she was still stuck in mental consumption. This is the brutal truth. Mental consumption is expensive, not in money, in opportunity. Every moment spent in endless planning is a moment not spent in action, and those moments add up to years of lost progress. Here is another layer. Mental consumption allows you to feel busy without being effective. You can spend an entire evening reading about saving strategies. You can spend a weekend comparing investment accounts. You can spend a month designing a debt payoff plan. All of that feels like work. You are tired afterward. You feel like you accomplished something, but if you did not take a single action, you accomplished nothing. Busyness is not the same as effectiveness. Activity is not the same as progress. And mental consumption is the most seductive form of busyness because it feels intelligent. It feels like you are doing the smart thing by thinking carefully before acting. But there is a line, and most people cross it without realizing. The line between thoughtful preparation and endless delay, between reasonable planning and paralysis by analysis. You need some planning, some research, some understanding. But you do not need perfect planning. You do not need complete understanding. You need enough to start, and then you need to start. Let me tell you about a man named Vikram. Vikram wanted to start a side income stream. He spent 6 months researching options, freelancing, consulting, online courses, affiliate marketing. He read case studies. He watched tutorials. He made lists of pros and cons. But he never launched anything. He never took a single client. He never created a single product. He was stuck in research mode, stuck in mental consumption. Meanwhile, his friend Rajesh simply started offering services on a freelance platform. His first few projects were small. He made mistakes. He learned as he went. But within 6 months, he had built a steady side income. Vikram was still researching, still planning, still consuming information. Rajesh was earning, not because he knew more, because he did more. This is the pattern. Mental consumption keeps you safe. It keeps you from the risk of failure. It keeps you from the discomfort of imperfect action. But it also keeps you from results. Real movement is different. Real movement is uncomfortable. It is messy. It is imperfect. It involves risk and uncertainty and the possibility of failure. But it is also the only thing that creates change. You cannot think your way into a better financial position. You have to act your way into it. Here is what you need to understand. Action produces clarity that thinking cannot. When you act, you get feedback. You learn what works and what does not. You discover obstacles you did not anticipate. You find solutions you did not plan for. But when you only think, you stay in hypotheticals. You imagine problems that may never occur. You plan for scenarios that may never happen. You refine strategies that you never test. Action cuts through all of that. It shows you reality. And reality is the only place where progress happens. Here is a practical shift. Set a time limit on planning. Give yourself 1 week to research a decision. 1 week to gather information. 1 week to think through options. Then act. Even if the plan is not perfect. Even if you still have questions. Even if you feel uncertain. Take one concrete action. Open the account. Make the first payment. Set up the automatic transfer. Track the first day of expenses. That action moves you from mental consumption to real movement. And once you are in movement, momentum builds. The second action is easier than the first. The third is easier than the second. But none of that happens until you stop consuming and start moving. Here is another truth. Mental consumption is addictive. It provides satisfaction without risk. It feels productive without requiring vulnerability. It gives you something to do that feels meaningful but costs you nothing. And because it feels good, you keep doing it. You keep reading. Keep planning. Keep researching. and you mistake that activity for progress. But it is not progress. It is delay. Sophisticated delay. Intelligent delay, but delay nonetheless. Here is how you know if you are stuck in mental consumption. Ask yourself, how long have I been thinking about this without acting? If the answer is more than a few weeks, you are consuming, not moving. If you have read multiple books, listened to countless podcasts, created detailed plans, but have not taken tangible action, you are stuck. And the way out is not more information, it is less. It is cutting off the consumption. It is choosing action even when you do not feel ready. Because you will never feel fully ready. Readiness is not something you achieve through more thinking. It is something you build through doing. Let me give you a final example. A woman named Aisha wanted to eliminate her debt. She read about debt strategies for months. Snowball method, avalanche method, balance transfer cards, debt consolidation. She made spreadsheets comparing her options. She calculated different scenarios. She planned meticulously. But her debt stayed the same, because planning to pay debt is not the same as paying debt. And all her mental work had produced zero real movement. Finally, she stopped planning. She picked the simplest approach. She took every extra rupee she had and threw it at her smallest debt. Not because it was the mathematically optimal strategy, because it was action, real movement. Within months, that first debt was gone. The momentum from that win pushed her to the next debt, then the next. Within 2 years, she was debt-free, not because she had the perfect plan, because she stopped planning and started doing. That is the lesson. Mental consumption is not preparation. It is procrastination dressed in intelligence. Real movement is imperfect action repeated consistently. It is starting before you are ready. It is learning by doing instead of learning before doing. And it is the only path to actual change. Not imagined change, not planned change. Real change that shows up in your bank account and your life. Stop consuming, start moving. That is the shift, that is the difference, and that is what separates people who understand from people who succeed. Chapter 5. Fear disguised as intelligence. There is a voice in your head that sounds rational. It sounds careful. It sounds wise. It tells you to wait, to gather more information, to make sure you understand fully before you act. It tells you that rushing in would be foolish, that you need to be certain. But that voice is not wisdom. That voice is fear, and it is keeping you broke. Fear does not always show up as panic or anxiety. Sometimes it shows up as caution, as prudence, as intelligence. It convinces you that you are being smart by waiting, that you are being responsible by not acting until you know more. But what you are really doing is avoiding. You are using the appearance of intelligence to protect yourself from the risk of failure. And that protection is costing you everything. Let me show you how this works. A man named Anil wanted to start investing. He understood the basics. He knew he should begin. But every time he was about to open an account, a thought would stop him. What if I choose the wrong investments? What if the market crashes right after I start? What if I lose money because I did not understand something important? These thoughts felt legitimate. They felt like reasonable concerns. They felt like the voice of intelligence telling him to be careful. But underneath, they were fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of losing money, fear of looking foolish. And that fear was dressed up as rational thinking. So he waited. He read more. He researched more. He told himself he was being smart, that he was avoiding preventable mistakes. But years passed, and he never started. The market went up. He missed those gains, not because he lacked knowledge, because he let fear disguise itself as intelligence and paralyze him. This is the trap. Fear is not always obvious. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind logic, behind reason, behind what seems like careful thinking. And because it sounds intelligent, you trust it, you follow it. You let it keep you from acting. Here is the mechanism. Your brain is wired to avoid loss more strongly than it pursues gain. This is called loss aversion, and it means that the fear of losing feels more powerful than the desire to win. When you think about taking action, your brain immediately imagines what could go wrong, what you could lose, what mistakes you could make. And those images feel urgent. They feel important. They feel like warnings you must heed. So you stop. You delay. You tell yourself you are being rational. But what you are really doing is obeying fear. Let me give you another example. A woman named Sneha wanted to negotiate her salary. She had been underpaid for years. She knew her market value. She knew she deserved more. But every time she thought about asking, fear stopped her. What if they say no? What if they think I am ungrateful? What if they decide I am not worth keeping and let me go? These questions felt like intelligent risk assessment. They felt like she was thinking through the potential consequences carefully. But they were fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict. Fear of losing what she already had. And that fear was preventing her from gaining what she deserved. She never asked. She stayed underpaid. And she convinced herself that she was being smart by not rocking the boat. But she was not being smart. She was being scared. Here is what you need to understand. Intelligence analyzes risk. Fear amplifies it. Intelligence looks at what could go wrong and weighs it against what could go right. Fear looks at what could go wrong and ignores everything else. It makes the downside feel inevitable. It makes the risk feel unbearable, and it keeps you frozen. This is why intelligent people often struggle financially. Not because they lack understanding, because their intelligence gives fear a convincing disguise. They can list 20 reasons why they should not start investing, why they should not ask for a raise, why they should not change their spending habits. And every reason sounds logical, reasonable, smart. But if you trace those reasons back to their root, you find fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of discomfort, fear of failure, fear of exposure. Here is how you spot this pattern in yourself. When you find yourself endlessly analyzing a decision without ever making it, that is fear. When you keep finding new reasons to delay, that is fear. When you tell yourself you need just a little more information before you can act, that is fear. Intelligence moves you toward action. It gathers enough information to make a reasonable decision, and then it decides. Fear keeps you in analysis. It always finds one more thing to consider, one more risk to evaluate, one more reason to wait. Let me tell you about a man named Kunal. Kunal wanted to leave a job that was draining him. He had savings, he had skills, he had options, but he could not pull the trigger. He made lists of reasons to stay. The salary was stable, the benefits were good, the market was uncertain, leaving would be risky. All of these reasons sounded intelligent. They sounded like careful thinking. But they were fear. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of losing security, fear of making a mistake. He stayed in that job for 5 more years, 5 years of misery. 5 years of knowing he should leave but convincing himself that staying was the smart choice. Finally, the company laid him off. He was forced into the uncertainty he had been avoiding. And within 6 months he found a better job, one that paid more, one that fulfilled him more. He realized that all those years he had been protecting himself from a risk that was not nearly as dangerous as he had imagined. His intelligence had given fear a voice, and he had listened to it for far too long. This is the cost of fear disguised as intelligence. It keeps you trapped in situations that harm you. It prevents you from taking risks that could improve your life. It makes you believe that inaction is safer than action. But inaction has a cost too, and that cost is often higher than the cost of acting imperfectly. Here is the shift you need to make. Stop asking, what could go wrong? Start asking, what is the cost of not acting? Most people focus only on the risks of action. They imagine failure, they imagine loss, they imagine embarrassment, and those images keep them from moving. But they do not imagine the cost of staying where they are, the cost of never trying, the cost of living with regret, the cost of watching years pass without progress. That cost is real, and it is often greater than the cost of any failure you might experience by acting. Here is a practical exercise. Think of a financial decision you have been delaying, something you know you should do but have not done. Now write down every reason you are waiting, every concern, every risk, every uncertainty. Look at that list. Ask yourself honestly, are these intelligent concerns or are they fear in disguise? If you removed fear from the equation, if failure was impossible, would you still wait? Or would you act immediately? Most of the time you would act, which means the delay is not about intelligence, it is about fear, and fear is not serving you. Here is another truth. Perfectionism is fear dressed as high standards. When you tell yourself that you will act once you have the perfect plan, once you understand everything, once conditions are ideal, you are not pursuing excellence. You are avoiding action. Because perfection is impossible. Conditions are never ideal. Understanding is never complete. And as long as you demand these things before you act, you will never act. This is fear using intelligence to protect you from risk. But it is also protecting you from reward, from growth, from progress. Let me give you a final example. A woman named Divya wanted to start a freelance business. She had the skills, she had potential clients, but she kept waiting. She told herself she needed a better portfolio, a more professional website, a clearer business plan. These seemed like legitimate requirements. They seemed like the smart thing to do before launching. But they were delay tactics. They were ways to avoid the vulnerability of putting herself out there, of offering her services, of risking rejection. Meanwhile, her colleagues started with nothing. No portfolio, no website, just a clear offer and the courage to reach out. Within a month, she had her first paying client. Divya was still perfecting her website, still refining her plan, still waiting for everything to be ready. She never launched. The perfect moment never came. And her intelligence, which she thought was protecting her, had actually imprisoned her. This is the lesson. Fear disguised as intelligence is still fear, and fear will always find reasons to keep you from acting. The way out is not more thinking. It is recognizing when thinking has become a shield, when caution has become paralysis, when intelligence has become an excuse, and then acting anyway. Not recklessly, not without thought, but without waiting for certainty that will never come. Because certainty is not the prerequisite for action. Courage is. And courage means acting despite fear, not waiting until fear disappears. Fear will always have something to say. It will always sound reasonable. It will always find risks to highlight. But you do not have to obey it. You can acknowledge the fear. You can hear its concerns. And then you can act anyway. That is what separates people who succeed from people who stay stuck. Not the absence of fear, the willingness to act despite it. Stop letting fear borrow the voice of intelligence. Stop letting caution become an excuse for inaction. Stop waiting for the perfect understanding that will make risk disappear. Act imperfectly, uncertainly, with incomplete information, because that is the only way progress happens. And the longer you wait for fear to give you permission, the longer you stay exactly where you are. Chapter 6. Why clarity creates paralysis. You would think that understanding your problem clearly would make it easier to solve, that seeing the path forward would push you to walk it. But the opposite often happens. The clearer you see what needs to be done, the more paralyzed you become. This is not a failure of intelligence. This is a psychological trap, and it is keeping you stuck in a cycle where awareness replaces action. Let me show you what this looks like. A woman named Leela tracked her spending for 3 months. She saw exactly where her money was going. She identified the problem areas: eating out, impulse shopping, subscription services she never used. She knew exactly what to cut. She knew exactly how much she would save. The path was crystal clear, but she did not follow it. She continued spending in the same patterns. She continued leaking money in the same categories. The clarity had not helped. It had made things worse, because now she could not pretend she did not know. She could not hide behind ignorance. She saw the problem clearly and was still not fixing it, and that created guilt, shame, a sense of failure that made action even harder. This is the trap. Clarity without action creates a painful awareness of your own inability to change, and that pain makes you want to avoid the problem entirely. Here is the mechanism. When you see a problem clearly, you also see the gap between where you are and where you need to be. And if that gap feels large, your brain perceives it as overwhelming. It is not that you do not know what to do. It is that what you need to do feels like too much, too hard, too far from your current behavior. So instead of taking the first step, you freeze. You stare at the gap. You feel the weight of it, and you do nothing. This is why people who track their expenses often give up after a few weeks. The tracking creates clarity, and the clarity creates overwhelm. They see how much they are spending, how much they need to change, and the size of the change paralyzes them. Let me give you another example. A man named Ravi calculated his debt payoff plan. He knew exactly how long it would take. He knew exactly how much he needed to pay each month. He had the full picture. But seeing the timeline made him feel hopeless. 3 years. That felt like forever. The mountain felt too high. The effort felt too sustained. So he stopped trying. If the goal felt unreachable anyway, why bother starting? The clarity had not motivated him. It had defeated him before he began. This is what happens when you focus only on the end result, when you measure yourself against the final destination instead of the next step. Clarity shows you the destination, but it does not show you how to walk toward it one step at a time. And without that process, the destination feels impossible. Here is another layer. Clarity creates accountability, and accountability is uncomfortable. When you do not know what you should be doing, you can excuse your lack of progress. You can tell yourself you are confused, that you need more information, that you are still figuring it out. But when you have clarity, those excuses disappear. You know what to do. You know how to do it. And if you are not doing it, the only explanation is that you are choosing not to. That realization is painful. It forces you to confront your own resistance, your own lack of discipline, your own unwillingness to change. And most people would rather avoid that confrontation. So they avoid the clarity that creates it. They stop tracking. They stop planning. They let the problem blur again so they can return to the comfort of not knowing. Let me tell you about a woman named Pooja. Pooja hired a financial advisor. The advisor gave her a clear plan, specific steps, clear timelines, exact actions. For the first week, Pooja felt empowered. She knew exactly what to do. The path was laid out. She felt ready. But by the second week, she stopped following the plan. She did not contact the advisor. She did not implement the steps. She let the clarity fade into the background. When asked why, she could not give a clear answer. The plan was good. She agreed with it. She just was not doing it. The truth was that the clarity had made her uncomfortable. It had removed her ability to hide. It had forced her to see that the only thing standing between her and progress was her own choices. And that level of responsibility felt too heavy. So she retreated. She let the plan sit untouched. She went back to living day by day without a clear direction, because unclear felt easier than accountable. This is the paradox. The thing you think will help you can become the thing that traps you. Clarity is essential, but clarity alone is not enough, and sometimes it is actively harmful if it is not paired with immediate action. Here is what you need to understand. Clarity reveals the work, and work is uncomfortable, so your brain resists. When you see clearly what needs to change, you see the effort required, the sacrifices, the discomfort, the sustained discipline. And if you focus on that instead of on the next small step, you will be paralyzed. The solution is not less clarity, it is different focus. Do not focus on the entire path. Focus on the next step, not the 3-year debt payoff plan. The next payment, not the complete budget overhaul. The next spending decision. Break the clarity into pieces small enough that they do not trigger overwhelm, because you do not need to see the whole journey to start walking. Here is a practical shift. When you have clarity about what needs to change, do not create a master plan. Create a first action, not a list of everything you will do. Just one thing you will do today, right now, this hour. If you know you need to cut spending, do not plan the entire budget. Just track today's expenses. That is it. One day. If you know you need to save, do not calculate your 5-year savings goal. Just transfer a small amount right now. Prove you can do it once. That first action breaks the paralysis. It proves that movement is possible. And once you have moved once, the second movement is easier. But if you let clarity sit without action, it becomes weight. It becomes pressure. It becomes another reason to feel bad about yourself without moving forward. Here is another truth. Clarity can become a substitute for action. You think that by seeing the problem clearly, you have done something about it. Your brain registers the clarity as progress. It feels like you have moved closer to the solution. But you have not. You have just defined the problem more precisely, and definition is not solution. Awareness is not change. This is why people can attend financial workshops, read books, work with advisors, and still not improve. They gain clarity, they feel like they have taken a step, but they have not actually changed their behavior. The clarity makes them feel productive, but it is false productivity. It is mental activity mistaken for real progress. Let me give you a final example. A man named Samir knew he needed to automate his savings. He understood the concept. He agreed with the strategy. He even knew which apps to use. But he spent months in clarity without action. He would think about setting it up. He would tell himself he would do it soon, but soon never came. Meanwhile, his friend set up automation in 10 minutes, without overthinking, without perfect planning, just action. A year later, his friend had saved consistently. Samir had not. He had clarity. His friend had results. That is the difference. Clarity without action is awareness without change. And awareness without change is just another way to stay stuck while feeling informed. Here is the shift. Stop pursuing perfect clarity. Pursue minimum viable clarity. You do not need to see every step. You need to see the next one. You do not need to understand everything. You just need to understand enough to start. And once you start, clarity will build. Action creates feedback. Feedback creates learning. Learning creates better action. But none of that begins until you stop demanding complete clarity before you move. Paralysis by analysis is real, and it is expensive. Every day you spend in perfect understanding without imperfect action is a day of lost progress. Stop letting clarity become a reason to delay. Start using clarity as a trigger for immediate small action. Because the only clarity that matters is the clarity that leads to movement. And movement, no matter how small, is the only thing that creates change. Not understanding, not planning, not perfect vision of the path ahead. Just the willingness to take one step, right now, without waiting for the full map. That step is all you need. And it is the only thing that will break the paralysis clarity creates. Chapter 7. The cost of staying informed. There is an entire industry built on keeping you informed. Financial news, market updates, expert opinions, economic forecasts, new strategies, changing trends. All of it delivered constantly, all of it demanding your attention. And you consume it. You read the articles, you watch the videos, you listen to the podcasts. You tell yourself you are staying informed, that you are being responsible. That knowledge is power. But here is the truth. Staying informed is not helping you. It is costing you. It is costing you time. It is costing you focus. It is costing you peace of mind. And most importantly, it is costing you action. Let me show you how this works. A man named Taran checked financial news every morning. He read about market movements, he tracked economic indicators, he followed expert predictions, he felt informed, he felt engaged, he felt like someone who took his finances seriously. But when you looked at his actual financial behavior, he was not doing anything with the information. He was not investing, he was not adjusting his strategy, he was not making decisions, he was just consuming. And that consumption was giving him the illusion of productivity without any actual progress. Worse, the constant stream of information was creating anxiety. Every negative headline made him worry. Every prediction of a downturn made him hesitate. Every piece of conflicting advice made him doubt. He was paralyzed by information, not empowered by it. This is the trap. Information feels valuable. It feels like you are doing something smart by staying up to date. But most financial information is noise. It is not actionable. It is not relevant to your specific situation, and it is not helping you move forward. Here is the mechanism. Your brain is wired to seek information. It perceives information as a form of control. If you know what is happening, you feel like you can prepare. You feel like you can respond. You feel like you are ahead of the curve. But financial markets do not work that way. You cannot predict them by consuming more news. You cannot control them by staying informed, and trying to do so creates stress without benefit. This is why people who consume the most financial content often have the worst results. They are too informed. They know about every risk, every uncertainty, every potential problem, and that knowledge keeps them from acting. They wait for the perfect moment. They wait for clarity. They wait for the risk to disappear, but it never does. And they stay on the sidelines while others who know less are already moving. Let me give you another example. A woman named Nisha followed multiple financial influencers. Each one had a different strategy. One said to invest aggressively. Another said to be conservative. One recommended individual stocks. Another recommended only index funds. She consumed all of this content. She tried to synthesize it, to find the perfect approach. But the more she learned, the more confused she became. Every piece of advice contradicted the last. Every expert had a different opinion, and she had no way to know who was right. So she did nothing. She stayed in analysis, she kept consuming, and her money sat in a savings account earning almost nothing while she waited for the perfect strategy to reveal itself. The information had not helped her. It had trapped her in indecision. Here is what you need to understand. Most financial information is not designed to help you, it is designed to keep you engaged. News outlets need clicks. Influencers need views. Platforms need your attention. So they create content that is alarming, controversial, or constantly changing, because that is what keeps you coming back. But that content is not serving your financial goals, it is serving their business model. and you are paying the price by giving them your time and your mental energy. Here is the shift you need to make. Stop consuming information for its own sake. Start consuming only what leads to immediate action. If a piece of information does not change what you do today, it is noise. It is entertainment disguised as education. And it is taking time and focus that could be spent on actual financial progress. Here is a practical rule: the action filter. Before you read an article, watch a video, or listen to a podcast, ask yourself, what action will I take because of this information? If you cannot answer that question clearly, do not consume the content. It is not serving you. It is just filling time. This rule will eliminate most of the financial content you currently consume. And that is good, because most of it is not helping you anyway. Let me tell you about a man named Karthik. Karthik used to spend an hour every day reading financial news. He told himself it was important, that he needed to stay informed, that it was part of being financially responsible. But one day he stopped. He decided to eliminate all financial content for 1 month. He would not read news. He would not follow influencers. He would not check market updates. Instead, he would focus only on his own financial actions, tracking his spending, saving consistently, paying down debt. At the end of the month, something surprising happened. His financial position had improved, not because he knew more, because he did more. Without the constant noise, he had clarity. Without the endless opinions, he made decisions. Without the fear-inducing headlines, he took action. He realized that staying informed had been a distraction, a sophisticated way to avoid the real work. And when he removed the distraction, progress became simple. Here is another layer. Consuming information makes you feel productive without requiring you to be vulnerable. When you read about investing, you feel like you are working on your finances, but you are not risking anything. You are not exposing yourself to the possibility of loss. You are safely on the sidelines learning about what others are doing. But progress requires vulnerability. It requires putting your money at risk, making decisions that could be wrong, taking action that could fail. And as long as you can stay in consumption mode, you never have to face that vulnerability. You can feel productive while staying safe. But safety is expensive. It costs you growth. It costs you opportunity. It costs you the compounding returns that only come from taking action early. Let me give you a final example. A woman named Jaya spent years learning about real estate investing. She read books. She attended seminars. She joined online communities. She consumed everything she could find. She felt like an expert. She could discuss strategies, analyze deals, and explain market dynamics. But she never bought a property. She never made an offer. She never took the first step. Meanwhile, her colleague who knew almost nothing bought a rental property. She made mistakes. She learned as she went. But 5 years later, she had equity, cash flow, and experience. Jaya had knowledge. Her colleague had results. That is the cost of staying informed without acting. You feel educated, but you are not progressing. Here's the truth. You do not need more information. You need a decision. Decide on a strategy, any reasonable strategy. Then stop researching. Stop consuming. Stop looking for the perfect approach. Just execute. Follow the strategy. Adjust as you learn. But stop waiting for more information to make you feel ready. Because more information will not make you ready. It will just give you more reasons to wait. The people who succeed financially are not the most informed. They are the most decisive. They pick a direction and move. They adjust along the way. But they do not stay stuck in endless learning. Here is a practical exercise. Unfollow every financial account that does not lead to action. Unsubscribe from every newsletter that you read but never implement. Stop watching content that makes you anxious without making you effective. Cut your information intake by 80%. Use the time you save to take action on what you already know. Track your spending for a week, set up automatic savings, make an extra debt payment, open an investment account. Any action is better than more consumption, because action creates results. Consumption creates the illusion of progress, and the illusion is costing you more than you realize. It is costing you time. It is costing you money. It is costing you years of potential growth. Stop staying informed. Start staying committed. Commit to action. Commit to progress. Commit to doing instead of learning. Because the only information that matters is the information you use. And if you are not using it, you are just collecting noise. That noise is expensive, and the sooner you eliminate it, the sooner you can hear the one voice that actually matters. The voice telling you to stop learning and start doing. Listen to that voice. It is the only one that will change your financial life. Chapter 8. When identity protects the old life. There is a version of yourself that you have been for a long time. A version that spends a certain way, that earns a certain amount, that lives in a certain financial pattern. And even when you say you want to change, part of you is protecting that version. Because that version is familiar. It is who you know how to be. And changing it feels like losing yourself. This is the deepest trap. Your identity is invested in your current financial life. And until you are willing to let go of who you have been, you cannot become who you need to be. Let me show you how this operates. A man named Anand always thought of himself as generous. He picked up checks. He bought gifts. He lent money to friends. This was part of his identity, part of how he saw himself and how others saw him. But it was also bankrupting him. He was in debt. He had no savings. His generosity was funded by credit cards and stress. When someone suggested he cut back, he resisted. He said he could not change. That generosity was part of who he was. That pulling back would make him feel like a different person. A worse person. He was right about one thing. It would make him a different person. But he was wrong that it would make him worse. His identity as the generous friend was protecting a behavior that was destroying his financial life. And he could not change the behavior without changing the identity. This is the trap. You tie your sense of self to your financial patterns. And when those patterns need to change, it feels like you are being asked to become someone you are not. But the truth is, you are not your spending habits. You are not your income level. You are not the financial identity you have built over the years. Those things are behaviors. And behaviors can change without erasing who you are. Here is the mechanism. Your brain uses identity as a shortcut. Instead of making decisions from scratch every time, it asks, what would someone like me do in this situation? If you see yourself as generous, you spend on others. If you see yourself as successful, you spend on status. If you see yourself as someone who deserves comfort, you spend on convenience. These identities guide your behavior automatically. And as long as they are in place, you will keep acting in alignment with them even when that alignment is harming you. Let me give you another example. A woman named Ritu saw herself as someone who valued experiences over things. She prided herself on traveling, dining at interesting restaurants, attending events. This was her identity. This was how she defined herself. But it was also why she could not save. Every time she had extra money, it went toward another experience, another trip, another meal, another event. She justified this by saying she was living fully, that she was prioritizing what mattered, that she did not want to be someone who just accumulated money without enjoying life. But underneath, there was fear. Fear that if she stopped spending on experiences, she would become boring, ordinary, someone she did not want to be. Her identity was protecting a spending pattern that was keeping her financially insecure. and she could not break the pattern without redefining her identity. Here is what you need to understand. Changing your financial life requires changing how you see yourself. If you see yourself as someone who cannot stick to a budget, you will not stick to a budget. If you see yourself as someone who is bad with money, you will continue to be bad with money. If you see yourself as someone who needs certain comforts to function, you will keep paying for those comforts no matter the cost. Your identity is a prison, and the only way out is to build a new one. But building a new identity is uncomfortable. It requires letting go of stories you have told yourself for years. Stories about who you are, what you value, what you need, and most people would rather stay broke than let go of those stories. Let me tell you about a man named Harish. Harish always saw himself as someone who could not say no. If a friend invited him out, he went. If someone asked for help, he gave it. If an opportunity to spend came up, he took it. This identity felt good. It felt generous. It felt open. It felt like the kind of person he wanted to be. But it was also why he was always broke. He could not protect his money because protecting money meant saying no. And saying no felt like betraying his identity. One day he realized something. The identity was not serving him. It was serving everyone else. He was sacrificing his financial security to maintain an image of being available, generous, and easygoing. And that image was costing him his future. He made a decision. He would become someone who could say no. Not someone selfish. Not someone closed off. Just someone who valued his own financial well-being enough to set boundaries. At first, it felt wrong. It felt like he was betraying himself. But over time, something shifted. He realized that saying no did not make him a worse person. It made him a more intentional person. He could still be generous. But now his generosity came from surplus, not from sacrifice. His new identity allowed him to save, to build security, to make financial progress, not because he changed his values, because he changed the story he told himself about who he needed to be. This is the shift. You do not have to become someone unrecognizable. You just have to let go of the parts of your identity that are protecting behaviors that harm you. Here is a practical exercise. Write down 3 statements that start with, I am someone who. Be honest. Write what you actually believe about yourself, not what you wish you believed. Now look at each statement and ask, is this identity helping my financial life or hurting it? If it is hurting, you have a choice. You can keep the identity and accept the financial consequences, or you can rewrite the identity in a way that serves you. For example, if you wrote, I am someone who values experiences over savings, you could rewrite it as, I am someone who values meaningful experiences that I can afford without sacrificing my future. The first identity justifies reckless spending. The second identity allows you to enjoy life while protecting your financial security. Same value, different framing. And that framing changes everything. Here's another truth. Your old identity will fight to stay alive. When you try to change, you will hear a voice. It will tell you that this is not who you are, that you are betraying yourself, that you are becoming someone you do not want to be. That voice is fear. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing the familiar version of yourself. But that voice is lying. You are not losing yourself. You are freeing yourself. You are removing the parts of your identity that were installed by habit, by social pressure, by fear. And you are choosing who you want to be instead. That choice is power. And it is the only thing that will allow you to change your financial life permanently. Let me give you a final example. A woman named Shruti always identified as someone who was not good with money. She said it casually. She said it often. And she believed it. That identity gave her permission to fail. If she overspent, it was not a choice. It was just who she was. If she could not save, it was not a lack of effort. It was her nature. But one day she decided to challenge that identity. She asked herself, what if I am not someone who is bad with money? What if I am just someone who has not learned to manage money well yet? That reframe changed everything. It moved her from fixed identity to learnable skill. It removed the excuse. It created possibility. She started treating financial management as something she could get better at, not something she was doomed to fail at. And that shift in identity allowed her to take action without the weight of a predetermined outcome. Within a year, she had built savings. She had paid down debt. She had created a budget that worked, not because she became a different person, because she stopped letting a false identity protect her from trying. Here is the lesson. Your identity is not fixed. It is a story, and stories can be rewritten. If your current identity is protecting behaviors that are keeping you broke, it is time to write a new story. Not a false story, not a fantasy, but a story that serves your future instead of protecting your past. You are not your spending habits. You are not your debt. You are not the financial patterns you have repeated for years. You are someone capable of change, someone capable of discipline, someone capable of building a different financial life. But you will never believe that if you keep clinging to an identity that says otherwise. Let go, rewrite, rebuild. That is the only way forward, and it is the only way to finally break free from the version of yourself that has been keeping you stuck. Chapter 9. Standards. You never installed. You have standards for many things in your life. Standards for how you dress, how you speak, how you treat others, how you show up at work. These standards guide your behavior automatically. You do not think about them, you just follow them. But when it comes to money, most people have no standards at all. They have hopes, they have intentions, they have vague ideas of what they should do. But they do not have clear, non-negotiable standards that govern their financial behavior. And without standards, you drift. You make decisions based on how you feel in the moment. You respond to impulses, you justify exceptions, and over time you end up nowhere close to where you wanted to be. Let me show you what this looks like. A man named Mohit wanted to save money. He said it often. He meant it sincerely. But he had no standard for saving. No rule that governed his behavior. No line he would not cross. So when he had extra money, sometimes he saved it, sometimes he did not. It depended on his mood, on what else he wanted, on how disciplined he felt that day. This is not a strategy. This is randomness. And randomness does not build wealth. It just creates inconsistency. Meanwhile, his colleague had a standard. 10% of every paycheck goes to savings. No exceptions, no negotiations, no decisions to make. It was not a goal. It was a rule. And because it was a rule, it happened automatically. She did not have to rely on motivation. She did not have to decide each time. The standard decided for her. 10 years later, she had built substantial savings. Mohit had almost nothing, not because he earned less, because he operated without standards while she operated with them. This is the difference. Standards remove decisions. They remove the opportunity for exceptions. They remove the mental negotiation that leads to inconsistency. When you have a standard, you do not ask yourself whether you feel like following it. You just follow it. Because that is what a standard is. A non-negotiable baseline. Here is the mechanism. Your brain is lazy. It prefers to conserve energy. And making decisions requires energy. So every time you have to decide whether to save, whether to spend, whether to track an expense, your brain looks for the easiest option. And the easiest option is usually the one that feels good in the moment, not the one that serves your future. But when you have a standard, you remove the decision. The standard answers the question for you. And your brain can relax because there is nothing to decide. There is only a rule to follow. Let me give you another example. A woman named Pallavi wanted to stop impulse buying. She tried willpower. She tried reminding herself of her goals. She tried feeling motivated. But none of it worked consistently, because willpower fluctuates, motivation fades, and when she was tired, stressed, or bored, the impulse would win. Then she installed a standard: no purchase over 500 rupees without a 48-hour wait. Not a suggestion, not a goal, a rule. At first it felt restrictive. She would see something she wanted and feel frustrated that she could not buy it immediately. But she followed the rule anyway, and something surprising happened. Most of the time, after 48 hours, she did not want the item anymore. The impulse had passed. The standard had protected her from herself. Within months, her impulsive spending dropped dramatically. Not because she suddenly had more discipline, because she had installed a standard that enforced the discipline for her. This is the shift. Stop relying on motivation. Start installing standards. Standards are the infrastructure of financial discipline. They are the rules that operate regardless of how you feel. And they are the only thing that creates consistent behavior over time. Here is what standards look like in practice. A standard for spending. I do not buy anything unplanned without waiting 24 hours. A standard for saving. 10% of every income goes to savings before I spend anything else. A standard for debt. I pay more than the minimum on every debt every month, no exceptions. A standard for tracking. I record every expense within 24 hours of making it. These are not goals. These are rules, and rules are only effective if they are non-negotiable. The moment you start making exceptions, the standard collapses. Because exceptions become habits, and habits become your new baseline. Let me tell you about a man named Arun. Arun had a standard. He would not carry a credit card balance. If he used the card, he paid it off in full at the end of the month, no matter what. This standard protected him. It meant he could only spend what he actually had. It prevented debt from accumulating. It kept him from living beyond his means. But one month he made an exception. An unexpected expense came up. He told himself he would carry a balance just this once and pay it off next month. But next month, something else came up, and the month after that. And soon the exception had become the norm. He was carrying a balance every month, paying interest, sliding back into debt. The standard had collapsed, and without it, his behavior collapsed too. This is why standards must be absolute, because your brain will always find a reason to make an exception. And once you allow one, you allow them all. Here is the truth most people avoid. You do not need better intentions, you need better standards. You already intend to save more. You already intend to spend less. You already intend to manage your money better. But intentions without standards are just wishes, and wishes do not create results. Standards create results, because standards enforce behavior even when intentions fade. Here is a practical exercise. Write down 3 financial standards you will install starting today. Not goals. Standards. Rules you will follow without exception. Make them specific. Make them measurable. Make them simple enough that you cannot misinterpret them. For example, Standard 1. I track every expense the day it happens. Standard 2. I save 15% of every paycheck before spending anything else. Standard 3. I wait 48 hours before any unplanned purchase over 1,000 rupees. Now follow them, not when you feel like it, every time, without negotiation. At first, this will feel rigid. It will feel uncomfortable. You will want to make exceptions. You will feel restricted. But that discomfort is the price of discipline, and discipline is the only thing that creates financial freedom. Here is another layer. Standards reveal who you actually are, not who you think you are. You might think you are someone who values saving. But if you have no standard for saving and you do not save consistently, then you do not actually value it. You just like the idea of it. Standards force honesty. They show you whether your actions align with your stated values, and if they do not, you have two choices: change your actions, or admit that your values are not what you thought they were. Most people avoid this confrontation. They keep saying they value things they do not actually practice, and they wonder why their financial life never changes. But the people who succeed are the ones who install standards that match their stated values, and then they follow those standards ruthlessly. Let me give you a final example. A woman named Rekha said she valued financial security above all else. She talked about it constantly, she worried about it often, but she had no standards that reflected that value. She spent impulsively. She saved inconsistently. She made financial decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. Her stated value and her behavior were completely misaligned, and that misalignment kept her perpetually anxious. Finally, she installed standards. She would save 20% of every paycheck. She would not use credit cards for anything she could not pay off immediately. She would track every expense daily. These standards forced her behavior to align with her stated values, and once they aligned, the anxiety disappeared. Not because her financial situation changed overnight, because she finally had a structure that reflected what she said mattered to her, and that alignment created peace. Here is the lesson. Standards are not restrictions. Standards are freedom. They free you from constant decision-making. They free you from the exhaustion of negotiating with yourself every day. They free you from the regret of impulsive choices. Standards give you a framework, and within that framework you can build a financial life that actually works. Without standards, you are building on sand. Every decision is made from scratch. Every day is a test of willpower. Every outcome is unpredictable. With standards, you are building on stone. The decisions are already made. The rules are clear. The outcomes are consistent. That consistency is what builds wealth, not intensity, not motivation, not occasional bursts of discipline. Consistency, day after day, month after month, year after year. And consistency only comes from standards. Stop trying to rely on willpower. Stop waiting for motivation. Stop hoping that someday you will magically become more disciplined. Install standards, follow them, protect them. And let them do the work that your fluctuating motivation never could. That is the path. That is the structure. And that is the only way to finally create a financial life that reflects what you say you value. Standards you never installed are standards you are living without, and living without standards is why you are still where you are. Install them today, not tomorrow, today. And prove to yourself that you are capable of following them. That proof is what will change everything. Chapter 10. From Understanding to Irreversible Action. You have reached the end of understanding. You know why knowledge alone does not work. You know why clarity can paralyze. You know why identity protects old patterns. You know why standards matter more than intentions. But none of that will change your financial life unless you do one thing. Act. And not just act once. Act in a way that cannot be undone. Act in a way that forces a new pattern. Act in a way that makes going back harder than moving forward. This is the final shift, from reversible experiments to irreversible commitments. Most people test change. They try saving for a week. They track expenses for a few days. They attempt a budget for a month. And when it feels hard, they stop. They reverse. They return to the familiar pattern. This is why change never sticks. Because it was never locked in. It was always optional, always temporary, always reversible. But real change is not reversible. Real change burns the bridge behind you. It removes the option to go back. It forces you forward even when you do not feel like moving. Let me show you what irreversible action looks like. A man named Manoj wanted to stop relying on credit cards. He tried cutting back. He tried using them less. He tried paying them off faster. But every time stress hit, every time an unexpected expense came up, he reached for the card again. The change was reversible, so it never became permanent. Then he made an irreversible decision. He closed the accounts, not just stopped using them, closed them completely, removed the option. At first, it felt terrifying. What if he needed them? What if an emergency happened? What if he could not manage without the safety net? But that terror forced something else. Discipline, planning, a real emergency fund. Because now, he had no choice. The cards were gone. He had to find another way. Within a year, his financial life had transformed, not because he suddenly became more disciplined, because he removed the ability to be undisciplined. He made the change irreversible. This is the power of irreversible action. It does not rely on motivation. It does not require daily willpower. It simply removes the path back to old behavior. Here is the mechanism. Your brain prefers reversibility. It likes to keep options open. It likes to know it can return to what is familiar if the new path feels too hard. But that preference is what keeps you stuck. Because as long as the old path is available, you will take it, especially when change feels uncomfortable, especially when new behavior requires effort. Irreversible action closes the old path. It forces you to build a new one, and that force is what creates lasting change. Let me give you another example. A woman named Geeta wanted to save consistently. She tried willpower, she tried apps, she tried reminders. But every month she found a reason to skip. An expense came up. She felt she deserved something. The savings could wait until next month. The action was reversible, so it never became a habit. Then she automated her savings, not just set up a transfer she could cancel. She set up a transfer to an account she made deliberately difficult to access, an account that required extra steps to withdraw from, an account designed to create friction. Now saving was not a decision. It was automatic. And accessing the money was inconvenient enough that she would not do it unless it was truly necessary. The action was irreversible, or at least reversing it required enough effort that her default became saving, not spending. Within a year, she had built more savings than in the previous 5 years combined, not because she was more motivated, because she made saving the path of least resistance and spending the path that required effort. This is the principle. Make the right behavior automatic and the wrong behavior difficult. Most people do the opposite. They make the right behavior require constant effort and the wrong behavior easy and convenient. Then they wonder why they keep failing. But failure is not about weakness. It is about design. If your environment is designed for failure, you will fail. If your environment is designed for success, you will succeed. Irreversible action redesigns your environment. It removes temptation. It installs friction. It makes the change structural instead of motivational. Here is what irreversible action looks like in practice. If you want to stop impulse buying, delete shopping apps from your phone. Not just ignore them, delete them. Make purchasing require effort. If you want to save automatically, set up a transfer that happens the day you get paid. Before you see the money, before you can spend it. If you want to eliminate debt, set up automatic payments above the minimum. Not payments you approve each month. Payments that happen whether you think about them or not. If you want to track spending, use a system that forces recording, a shared account with someone who will notice if you do not log expenses, a challenge with consequences if you miss a day. These are not suggestions, these are structural changes, and structure is what creates consistency. Here is another truth. Irreversible action creates identity shift. When you make a change reversible, you still see yourself as someone who might go back. Someone who is trying something new but has not really changed. But when you make a change irreversible, you are forced to see yourself differently. You are no longer someone who is trying to save. You are someone who saves. You are no longer someone working on debt. You are someone eliminating debt. That identity shift is critical, because identity drives behavior, and when your identity shifts, your behavior follows automatically. Let me tell you about a man named Neaton. Neaton wanted to stop living paycheck to paycheck. He tried budgeting. He tried tracking. He tried being more careful, but nothing stuck. Then he made an irreversible decision. He moved to a smaller apartment, not temporarily, permanently. He reduced his largest fixed expense in a way that could not easily be reversed. At first, it felt like a sacrifice. He missed the extra space. He felt like he was moving backward. But the change forced a new financial pattern. With lower rent, he could save. He could pay off debt. He could build security. And after a few months, something shifted. He stopped seeing the smaller apartment as a sacrifice. He started seeing it as the foundation of his financial freedom. His identity changed from someone who was struggling to someone who was building. That identity shift made every other financial decision easier, because now he was not just trying to save money. He was being someone who valued financial security over comfort. The irreversible action had created a new version of himself, and that new version made choices the old version never could. Here is the final truth. You cannot think your way into irreversible action. You can only act your way into it. All the understanding in the world will not push you to close the credit card account, delete the shopping apps, automate the savings, or downsize your lifestyle. Those actions require a decision, a moment where you stop analyzing and start moving. A moment where you commit without knowing for certain that it will work. That moment is terrifying. Because it is irreversible, because it removes safety, because it forces you into a new pattern without a guarantee of success. But that moment is also the only moment where real change happens. Not gradual change, not temporary change. Permanent change that shifts your entire financial trajectory. Here is what you need to do right now. Choose one irreversible action. One change you can make today that cannot easily be undone. One structural shift that removes the option to continue old behavior. Not a goal, not a plan. An action, something you do, something that creates immediate irreversible change. Maybe you automate a savings transfer. Maybe you close an account. Maybe you delete an app. Maybe you cancel a subscription. Maybe you sell something that represents old spending patterns. Whatever it is, do it now. Not after you finish this chapter. Not after you think about it more. Now. Because this is the moment where understanding becomes action, where knowledge becomes change, where your financial life finally shifts from what you know to what you do. And once you take that irreversible step, something will happen. You will feel fear. You will question whether you made the right choice. You will feel the discomfort of change. But you will also feel something else. Power. The power of knowing you are no longer waiting, no longer planning, no longer understanding without doing. You will be moving. And movement, once it starts, builds momentum. The first irreversible action makes the second one easier. The second makes the third easier. And before long, you are not someone who understands financial principles. You are someone who lives them. That is the shift. That is the transformation. And it only happens through irreversible action. Stop learning. Stop planning. Stop understanding. Act irreversibly. Today. That is the only thing left to do. And it is the only thing that will finally close the gap between who you are and who you have always known you could be. Conclusion. You have spent your life knowing what to do. You have read the books. You have understood the principles. You have seen the path clearly. But knowing has never been the problem. Doing has been the problem. And the reason you have not done is because you have been using knowledge as a shield, a way to feel productive without risking failure, a way to stay informed without becoming vulnerable. This audiobook was not about teaching you something new. It was about showing you why everything you already know has not worked. Why clarity creates paralysis. Why understanding replaces action. Why intelligence disguises fear. Why staying informed keeps you stuck. The truth is simple. Your financial life will not change because you learn more. It will only change when you act differently. And action does not come from more understanding. It comes from commitment, from structure, from irreversible decisions that force new patterns. You do not need another strategy. You need to follow the one you already know. You do not need more time to prepare. You need to start with what you have right now. You do not need perfect conditions. You need the courage to act in imperfect ones. The gap between knowing and doing is not closed by more knowledge. It is closed by one decision. The decision to stop learning and start moving. To stop planning and start executing. To stop understanding and start proving. That decision is available to you right now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now. You already know what to do. The only question left is whether you will do it. And that question will define everything. Not what you know, not what you understand, not how informed you are, what you do. Starting today. That is the only thing that has ever mattered, and it is the only thing that ever will. If this audiobook has brought you clarity, strength, or peace, consider supporting the channel so more people can find this message. Please like this audio and subscribe. Your support helps this work reach those who feel overwhelmed, anxious, or unprotected, and gives them a path back to calm, confidence, and emotional freedom. Thank you for listening. Stay grounded. Stay wise. You are the anchor in every storm.